How's everybody doing? There's enough awake. We can keep moving. Okay. All right. A couple years ago, I was in college. When I started out one school and I transferred to a Christian school to get ready for ministry. And so the school I was at was a Christian college that focused on developing people for serving God in lots of functions. And we had, so there's lots of people with lots of visions and lots of dreams. And there was one guy that I knew, became a pretty good friend over time. And he was the best natural speaker I have ever heard in my life. He was just, it was incredible to hear this guy speak on anything, but especially when he taught the Bible or something like that, it was just amazing. And of course, we lost track of each other after college, like happens a lot. He was in the same major I was, and recently reconnected, of course, through Facebook, found him, and I looked on his About page, and under spiritual stuff, it said non-religious. And then there was another at the time, young woman, and she and I friends. As a matter of fact, after one really hard breakup she had, I managed to sneak in a couple mercy dates. It was kind of nice. And before she figured out what was going on. But we were pretty good friends, and we have reconnected recently through Facebook again, and conversation recently. And I remember when I met her, it was pretty cool because she'd done mission trips. She'd gone to a Christian high school and college, and now she let me know recently that she would classify herself as a nun, not N-U-N, living in a monastery, but nun, N-O-N-E, as in when they have surveys and they say, how would you describe yourself in the religious spectrum out of all the options, Christian and all the different flavors of Christian and Buddhist and Hinduism and Muslim, how would you classify? And she would check none now. And if we look around our country, there are currently it's 23%, almost 1 out of 4, adults classify themselves as none. That's up 7% in the last 7 years. Well, actually, the survey's 2 years old, so I don't know what it is now. It's probably really, really close to 25%. Among millennials, it's 35%. And here's the thing. Most of the people who I know who classify themselves as nuns aren't mad. They're not hostile to God. They're not angry. They just didn't have a sufficient reason to stay connected to the church, or there are sufficient reasons they believe to disconnect from the church. And if I can be really honest, which I think I'm allowed to be once in a while, right? At least once a week, I try to be honest. Okay? To be honest, I kind of understand. It makes sense to me. A lot of what is projected as Christianity today is something that I find unattractive. I don't know that if I was out in the world, if I was out in our culture living apart from God and apart from Christ, and I looked at what the church normally presents as its nature, I don't think I would be banging on the door. I think I'd be really happy sleeping in on Sunday mornings and checking none when they ask me the questions, with the way that things go in the world right now. Andy Stanley did a sermon series, a pastor in Atlanta, and before I went on my sabbatical, I was watching this series, and I was like, okay, my people need to hear this stuff. I need to just steal a bunch of his stuff and preach this sermon. No, but it is inspired very much by his series. And he said this: it's not the nuns' fault that they found Christianity so unengaging and so unappealing and so unscientific and so irrational. It's my fault, it's our fault. And one of the saddest parts of the process is when I talk to people who have stepped away from their faith, or who never had it to start with, especially the people who stepped away, I have yet to hear anybody tell me, I was happy to be a Christian, and I was reading in the Gospels. I was reading those 4 books about Jesus' life, and I read something Jesus said, and what Jesus said I couldn't accept, so I walked away from the church because of Jesus. I've never heard anybody who walked away from Christianity because of Christ. I don't know if you know anybody who fits that category, but everyone I've ever met who walked away from Christianity did it because of Christians and the way the church presents itself and some of the beliefs we hold and the attitudes we have, not because of Jesus. And Andy also said this: I think as Americans we have embraced the wrong version of Christianity. It's not appealing. In many cases, it's not even accurate to what we find when we actually look at the early church and we look at what the Bible actually teaches us. So we're starting a series today called None of the Above. It's going to be different than what we've done in the past because it's going to be more of a conversation. Some people think, oh, Steve's going to get up here and prove the nuns wrong. I'm not. I'm going to converse and I'll be talking, and as I talk, like I always talk, to try to talk to everybody in the room and everybody online and try to help you see who you are and where you are. I will be talking to the nuns and trying to help them understand what they actually walked away from when they walked away. But I'm also going to be talking to the church, the people who classify themselves as Christians, and asking that we look deep in our hearts and we look deep in our minds and we look deep in our faiths and say, what are we doing to hasten the exit? What are we saying and teaching that aren't Christ-like, that are encouraging people to leave and not encouraging them to come, and definitely not encouraging them to stay? So we're gonna start today, and we're gonna talk very directly. Okay. I know I say this frequently, but over the course of this series, I'm going to tick off everybody. Okay? Because I think we all need it. We need to stop and look deeply at what we believe and what we say we believe. We need to look deeply and help the people who classify themselves as nuns look deeply at what they believe and what they say they believe so that we're all talking about the same thing. And so I hope so we can present a Christianity that people actually want to be part of. I mean, the one thing about Jesus, people who had nothing in common with Jesus, people who were very unlike Jesus, were very attracted to Jesus. And it seems we only attract people who are just like us. So anyway, if you want to, turn on your Bible to Genesis 1. I would have given you more time, but it's page 3, for goodness sake. So by the time I say it, if you're going to look it up, you've already found it. I'm just going to read just a touch to begin with. It's going to be, like I said, it'll be a very different conversation today. In the beginning, God, you've heard this. You may have heard this before. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless and empty, and darkness covered the deep waters, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw that the light was good. Then he separated the light from the darkness. God called the night day, and the darkness night, and evening passed, and morning came, marking the first day. Now, I believe that Genesis 1:1, the first chapter, the first verse that I read there, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, is the ultimate true-false test. How you answered that question will drive a huge chunk of the rest of the decisions you make in life. Is there a God? Is there not? Okay? Now, what we're going to do, though, is we're going to come at it from a different direction. Because we're going to attack it from the concept of what if it's false? What if it's not true? What if there is no God? What does that mean? Now, I'm not going to try to talk anybody into anything. I'm not going to try to, if you're an atheist, I'm not going to try to talk you out of that today. I'm going to present some facts, give some thoughts, maybe some reasons why I believe what I believe, but I'm not going to try to tell you differently because it's really hard to prove certain things. It's hard to put a number on them. And another reason I'm bringing up today is most people who I talk to who classify themselves as nuns don't classify themselves as atheists. They wouldn't say there's no God. But here's the thing. Whenever you walk away from one thing, you have to move towards something else. If I'm moving away from my little table here, I am moving toward that stand. And if you're moving away from God, what else could you be moving toward than no God? I'm not saying that you embrace atheism. I'm saying you're moving toward it. And I want you to understand, if you're a nun, what you're moving toward. Okay? And if you're a Christian, I want you to understand how deep the reality of how God impacts everything is. Now, before I get too deep into it, I am talking to true atheists about this. Because true atheist really doesn't believe in God. Now, there are a lot of people I know who classify themselves as atheists because if you say you're an atheist, that grants you the shut up power. Okay, what do you believe? I'm an atheist, which means you're not allowed to talk to me. A lot of people I know, they don't live at all as atheists, but they like to put the title on themselves. Today I'm talking to people who believe that there is no God, that there is a universe and there is no God plugged into the side of that. Carl Sagan put it this way: the cosmos is all that is, or ever was, or ever will be. And again, I'm not going to say if you're an atheist that you're wrong, but I do want you to understand the implications of the statement. Okay? Like the first thing, because if there is no God, there is no you. If there's truly no God, I'm not saying if you've rejected the Christian God, if I'm not saying if you've rejected a specific God or gods or whatever, but you still believe, if you don't believe there's any force that can be with you, then you believe, you have to accept there is no you. The thing my phrase I use a lot is the dirt in transition, that if there is no God, that there was dirt, and somehow that dirt organized itself into a being that seemed to have self-awareness, and then over time will go back to being dirt. I recently found out that a prominent atheist, Christopher Hitchens, actually has an analogy almost exactly like that he affirms. But let me put it this way. Let's say you want an axe, and you've got like a wood stove in your house. So you need a good axe because you're going to work this thing. You can't go to Walmart and buy the cheapest thing they got because you'll wear it out. So you go to a good store and you buy the best axe they have. And you take it home and you are working it. And after a year or so, as you're working it one day, one of the things is you can accidentally miss the log with the head and hit the log with the handle. And you slip and hit it with the handle just right, and the handle shatters. And you're like, oh. Now, if you bought the cheap Walmart axe, what would you do? You'd throw this one away and go buy another one. But you didn't. You have a good axe. So what do? Instead is you go back to the store and you buy a new handle for the axe. Another really good handle made of really good wood, and you attach it into the head of the axe. And you go back to using your axe. And you use it for years. You're using this axe. Man, it gets to where this new handle has grooved to your hand. It just feels good in your hand. You've got everything. But you notice that as you've used this axe over years and years, it started to wear down. It doesn't need sharpening. It's wearing out. And so you need a new handle. So you go back to the store, and again, you buy a really nice handle, and you buy a new axe head, and you put the axe head on the handle. Here's the question. Is it the same axe? There's only two components to an axe. There is the axe head and there is the handle, and you have replaced both. Do you have the same axe, or do you have a different axe? Now, it would be really a tougher question because that's kind of an irrelevant philosophical question. It's a stinking axe. Who cares? If you were claiming that the axe had self-awareness and was in itself an entity, right? Because the only way that could be the same entity is if there was something about the axe head that was able to transfer to the new handle, and then when they took the head off and put the new one on, they transferred the identity to the other one. But you recognize, what's holding the identity? Where is the identity located on the axe? And the answer is, there is no identity in an axe, so it's not really an important question. But do you realize that you do not have a single cell remaining from when you were first started? That your body is constantly recycling cells. Cells, especially in your brain, like everywhere else, are constantly dying. Some of your brain cells are dying faster than others. But the brain cells are constantly dying and being replaced with brand new cells. And if you go from a purely identity perspective, you are not the person you were 20 years ago, 5 years ago. Because every cell in your body has been replaced. And if all you are, if there is nothing outside of the physical, if that's all you are, then where's your identity? Where are you? And the only possible answer is there is no you. If all there is the natural physical universe, if all you are is biology and chemistry controlled by the laws of physics, there can be no you. You do not exist. Christopher Hitchens, a prominent atheist, he wrote some really scathing anti-religious books, and then he caught cancer, and as he was in the hospital and in the process of dying, the doctors and nurses kept saying, well, your body's doing this and your body's doing that. And Hitchens finally told them, I don't have a body, I am a body. All I am is this. Now here's the thing. It is possible at some level to believe that. It is totally impossible to live it. You'll notice he started each sentence with what? I. He denied that he was an individual. At the same time, he announced that he was an individual. Because while it's possible to believe it, you can't live that way, and you certainly don't want anybody treating you as if you're not an individual. Now, I am sure there are philosophical atheists and studied ones who have an argument against that and say, oh, no, we believe in but I really don't see how you get past that. I don't see how you get past that once you replace the axe handle and the axe head, you don't have the same axe. I don't know how you get past it unless there's something outside or something supernatural, as it were. I don't mean in like ghost things. I just mean there's another plane of existence where the identity resides in some way. But there are people, I'm sure, who would argue and say, Steve, you're not right about that one. But there's the next one, you can't argue with me about this one. Because if there is no God, there is no free will. Every decision you've ever made is an illusion. Why is that? Well, do you like to watch the videos where they set up like a bazillion dominoes and they go up ramps and fall off tables and get shot through the air, and they're just like the whole I was telling first service, we really should do that. We should just take all the chairs on and set up one of those huge domino things in here with just all the cool different colors and splitting off in different, all that really cool stuff. And once you set one of those up, let's say you set one of those up and it's all, what choice does domino number 2,311 have as to what it will do once you push the first domino? None. When the domino that's one before it decides to fall because the one beside it hit it, because it didn't decide, did it? It just got hit. And when it gets hit, it will fall the way that physics tell it to fall. When I was studying chemistry, both at high school and college, and physics, we'd have physics labs where we were to take a certain combination of chemicals and put them together and record the result. And the teacher would grade how well we did by how close we came to what she knew the result was supposed to be. Because if you take hydrogen and you light it on fire, you get water. Okay? If you're taking pure hydrogen, H, you add oxygen from the air, H2O, you get water. If you get something else, you did it wrong. Because hydrogen has no choice as to what happens when it gets exposed to oxygen. And every chemical reaction is governed by the laws of chemistry, and every biological response is governed by the laws of biology, even though they may be complicated and produce multiple results. There is nothing biology can do about it. And if all you are a set of chemicals governed by the laws of chemistry, biology, and physics, you have no more choice on anything than the 2,311th domino has on whether or not it falls in which direction or when. Stephen Hawking, you may know him. He's the guy, brilliant man. He's in a wheelchair because he's got Lou Gehrig's disease, and it's very slowly been taking his life for years and years. He's occasionally in the Big Bang Theory. He said everything about man is determined, but because it's determined, it doesn't even matter. Now, here's the thing again. You can say that everything in your life is determined and you have no free will, but it's impossible to live that way. Hawking himself said, I've noticed even people who claim everything is predestined and that we can do nothing to change it, look before they cross the road. Now, that doesn't mean they're wrong. Okay, I didn't say they were wrong. I'm saying no one can live that way. They have to change the way they live. That's almost in opposition to how they believe. The fact that they write all these books that they had no control over, it just amazes me. Okay, now let's go one more level deeper. There is no God. There is also no value, meaning, or purpose. There is no value, meaning, or purpose, because where would it come from? If I take two chemicals and combine them into a new chemical, is there more value in the new chemical? Not really. Or better yet, you ever go to a modern art display showing one of the real there stuff, and you're walking through and you come across this, it's like an 8 by 10 feet white rectangle, totally white, except there's a red dot in the top right corner. And you walk by and you go, and you're stuck. You got two options because you're in the museum. You can look at it like this and say, that was a very bold choice. I like the courage that this piece of art displays. Or you can turn and say, honey, remember when Tommy got that tennis ball and dipped it in paint and threw it against the garage? Didn't he do that? Now, if there is no God, if there's nobody outside the system giving value, then there's no way for anybody to really be right or wrong. I mean, in reality, the fact that this has this 8 foot by 10 foot white thing with a red ball in the corner, if somebody's willing to pay him $50,000, how much is it worth? $50,000. Because the system determines the value, because that's the only way it can determine value. And the system determines morality because that's the only place we can get morality. If there's nothing outside the system to determine what is right, what is wrong, what is valuable, what is not valuable, all that can happen is that the system makes decisions. Matter of fact, a few years ago, I think we're turning a corner on it, but not necessarily in a good way, but we've been teaching kids for years that, all value is culturally determined. In other words, if these people in this country, in this culture do this way, that's okay. We can't judge that culture because we're not in that culture. Until those kids got to college and started writing term papers and talking to the professor, and the professor would say something along the lines of, well, there is Hitler, and Hitler did something, we know that's wrong, and a student raised their hand and said, wait a second, if all value and morality is culturally determined, then how can we look into that German culture in the 1930s and say that Hitler was wrong? See, again, you can say there's no such thing as value and meaning and purpose, but you can't live that way. Matter of fact, want to start a riot? Publicly proclaim that any group lacks meaning, purpose, and value. And watch the sparks fly. As everybody jumps up and yells, many of them who would claim themselves to be atheists, who have no place to have meaning and value and purpose, get very mad and throw things at you. Right? Now, if there is no God, then there can be no meaning, no value, no purpose. Now, because if you're like me and you're a follower of God, Christ, you believe that there is a God, and you believe that this is from Genesis again. So God, this is verse 27 and 28. So God created human beings in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. Then God blessed them and said, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and govern it, reign over the fish of the sea, the birds in the sky, all the animals that scurry along the ground. Created human beings in his image, value. He blessed them, value, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and govern it, purpose and meaning. Because we believe God exists outside the system. And therefore, as a person with identity, with the ability to say, I, me, with identity, he's able to then endow us with identity and give us meaning and purpose. Okay? That's how we would say it. Again, I'm not saying we're right. I am saying I like our system. There's one more piece. Because there's a question that the kids like to ask. And adults do too, but they don't ask it out loud because they think they should know this one by now. And the question is, who made God? In the beginning, God. Who made God? And the illustration I use is I go back to that, all those dominoes on the floor here. And then I go back to Aristotle. Because if all the precautions are in place, because if you're putting one of those things together that covers the entire floor of a gymnasium, you've got stops every few feet, right? You're not going to accidentally knock this puppy over. Okay, and no wind gusts. You're going to cut off all the air conditioning heat unit because you're not getting any breezes in here. You're going to lock those doors tight because nobody's opening a door. So you're going to make it so nothing like wind can blow it over. If that's the case, when will the dominoes start falling? When one of the dominoes in the middle decides, I want to fall down now. No. The only way to get the dominoes started is for someone who is outside the system, who is not a domino, to walk over to the first domino and go like this. And Aristotle showed thousands of years ago that there has to be an unmoved mover. There has to be a being outside of the system. He didn't use the dominoes, that's mine, to push it over. Matter of fact, there has to be somebody outside the system to set up the dominoes. Does that make sense? Because otherwise, you've got dominoes setting themselves up and then pushing themselves over. And I guess that's possible. But if you say that, and you say there's no God, if there's no God, everything came from no thing. The dominoes assembled themselves, and one of them fell over, at least, and the process started. And you'd have to say that first life emerged from no life with no help. As Francis Collins is a Christian who was the first person to map out our DNA. He's the one who mapped out the entire system. And he said, from lifeless matter, what happened was it went from lifeless matter to the digital elegance of DNA. And an atheist will say that things just happened. There was this chemical bumped into this chemical, which bumped into this chemical, which knocked into this molecule, which knocked into this molecule, which over time created everything that we see, including us. And Andy Stanley, I mentioned earlier, the pastor. Let me hold that quote. I'm going to read this other quote first. I was talking about Richard Dawkins. Richard Dawkins, who's the atheist, he describes the system this way. Think about it. On one planet, and possibly only one planet in the entire universe, molecules that would normally make nothing more complicated than a chunk of rock gathered themselves together into chunks of rock-sized matter of such staggering complexity that they are capable of running, jumping, swimming, flying, seeing, hearing, capturing, and eating other such animal chunks, animated chunks of complexity, capable in some cases of thinking and feeling and falling in love with yet other chunks of complex matter. Okay? And I cannot say that that's impossible, but this is where the Andy Stanley came in. As he studied it, he said, it's virtually impossible for me to think about natural selection without it starting to sound like an invisible personal force with an agenda. Because our universe doesn't look like a set of random accidental things did this. It looks like there was a purpose behind those seemingly random accidental things. Okay? So, you're allowed to believe that it was all accidental. But everything coming from no thing with no help challenges me. Now, some of you are saying, Steve, I mean, the thing is, Steve, you're talking about science. Aren't Christians anti-science? Well, I'll be really honest. Some of them are. I'm not making this up. I wrote a book a couple years ago on science and creation and all that stuff. And one of the people who helped me write it was a professor. Well, she wasn't a professor. She was getting her PhD in evolutionary biology from the University of Minnesota at the time. She's now got her degree. And was very helpful and critiqued everything and sent me ideas, and we got along great. And she said she had Christian friends, who told her that the fossils that we find were planted by Satan to deceive us. Even worse, she had friends who told her they were planted by God to test our faith. Well, now we'll talk about that next week. Okay? But Christianity isn't anti-science, and we're not supposed to be. But I'll do that next week. Now, let's admit a fact. What I have described today, if you're an atheist, is discouraging, right? It's discouraging to think there's no you. It's discouraging to think you have no free will. It's discouraging to think that there is no meaning, hope, or purpose in life. And it's a little weird to think that everything came from no thing with no help. Doesn't mean it's not true. There are things that happen to my dismay, and I'm not happy about the fact they happen. Hurricanes Irma and Harvey do not make me happy, but they happened. So I'm not going to get up here and say, I have just proven the existence of God, because I have not. I have simply shown you that if you choose to live as a true, there is no God, there is no supernatural, these are the implications of your belief. That make sense? Now, let's do something really weird. And let me point out something to you that you may or may not have noticed. I think I've gone quite a few minutes into my sermon. I've never even mentioned Jesus, because that's the nature of what I'm doing today, not excluding Jesus. And the best that I have done in my talk today, sermon, whatever you want to call this thing that I do, is show you it is logical and not stupid to accept the concept of a God. That's all I've done. Right? I haven't discussed, I'll do this right, I'm going to sneak this in right here. I haven't carried out our story that we believe that there was a God, there is a God who created the heavens and the earth. He created humans to be his worshipers and his friends. And the humans rejected God, went into a state of rebellion we call the fall. And God immediately began working throughout history, throughout his story, to eventually bring Jesus Christ on earth. See, I worked him in. And in bringing in Jesus and Jesus' death on the cross, he came up with the solution that could restore creation to what he created it to be, and restore us to a relationship with God. Now, from what I've done today, if you're a true atheist or even a strong none, I don't know that I've told you enough to make you think you should accept Christ today. But I do this every week, and I think there's a good reason for today, because it is possible that there's somebody here today who's been on the edge of thinking about becoming a Christian, and there's a roadblock, there's a boulder in the way, and during the talk today, I did manage to kick your boulder out of the way. Your one objection to Christianity might have been something that I discussed, and now you're ready to accept Christ. And if that's the case, we got a table with blue bags on it in the back. You just grab one. Somebody who's been trained will take about 10 minutes, walk you through the contents, show you how to have that relationship with Christ. If not, that's okay. We're in week 1 of a discussion, of a conversation. I honestly don't expect a lot of people to say, I'm ready to become a Christian today because you told me that what it means to be an atheist. I'm not expecting that, although God's pretty cool when he does neat things. But if you're ready for that, you grab a blue bag. If you're ready to be baptized because you're already a Christian and haven't been baptized and proclaimed it, just let us know. We'll be glad to sign you up for the next baptism. Maybe you want to remind yourself of what Christ did for you again. We have a communion stations front and the back. Maybe that as I was talking, there was somebody in your life who is classifying himself or herself as a nun, and you'd like to pray for them. We have a cross over there. You can pray for anything else you want to pray about during this next time. You want to pray with somebody. We have some people around the auditorium. Be glad to pray with you. But we're starting a conversation. If you're classifying yourself as none, let me tell you what we're going to do. Next week, we're going to talk about the fact that Christianity is not anti-science. Okay? I'm going to show you that very clearly. And over the course of this series, I'm going to show you that Christianity is a more appealing and robust alternative than you might have thought it was. That the thing you rejected is something that deserved to be rejected, but the reality is something totally different. If you're a Christian, this was the easy week. Last week, I did a sermon on discipleship, and I got a little loud, a little passionate. We talked about the concept of this guy who God told him to go somewhere, and the guy didn't know if he'd be able to survive the trip, and God said to him, I didn't say you were supposed to come back, I just told you to go. And we acknowledged that if God says go somewhere, it's our job to go. Well, most of us are never going to be called, let's be honest, in the name of Christ at least, are never going to be called in the name of Christ to go somewhere and risk our life. Many of our people risk their lives, but it's not specifically because God said go there and do that. But even more frequently than God says go into a place that's dangerous, God says go into a place that's uncomfortable. Go into a place that makes you squirm. Go to a place in your mind where you start asking questions that you don't like to ask, and you start entertaining possibilities that you don't want to entertain. That you start looking at the faith that you live and recognizing there are parts of it that have nothing to do with Jesus and you got them somewhere else, and even though you've been living them for years, it's time to say goodbye to certain beliefs and practices that are part of your faith but aren't part of the Bible. And everybody thinks they've gotten all that stuff out, but almost all of us haven't. I am discovering all the time the ways that I differ from what God teaches about what I'm supposed to be. And over the next 3 weeks, you will, if you are a follower of Christ, be uncomfortable. You will possibly get mad at me. It's almost be as bad as if you come to church and somebody's sitting in your seat. But I have friends who have walked away from Christianity, although they really never rejected Jesus. I have family members who have rejected Christianity, but still think pretty cool of Christ. They've just rejected the way we reflect it. And you have friends, and you have family members, and and you have neighbors, and you have coworkers who have rejected Christianity for all the wrong reasons. And Jesus said, I have come to seek and to save the lost. The ones who've wandered away, the ones who've strolled away, the ones who've stormed out. And he passed that calling on to us. And if it requires sacrifice, if it requires discomfort, if it requires us to rethink things, if it requires other church people to think we're idiots, that's okay. Because I believe that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and he set in motion a path that will lead to glory. And I am one of the people he has called, as you are, to be part of calling others, especially those